Hello, I'm Alex Honnold. I'm a professional rock climber, and today I get the pleasure of chatting with Ivona, an oceanographer and scientist who can help me understand NASA's PACE mission and what it does for the health of the oceans and what that means for us. So, Ivona, thanks for chatting with me today.
So happy to be here. I'm very honored myself, too.
Thanks. You may not know, but actually the last two big expeditions that I've done were for television programs, and they both involved ocean health, and one of them we launched a NASA probe for OMG, the Oceans Melting Greenland project.
Oh, awesome.
So I feel like I've been sort of into NASA ocean health projects already, but so it's nice to be able to talk to you today and learn more about the current project.
So yeah, well, I mean, like you were working part of the this part of NASA that's looking at AIs, but NASA is really looking at all different systems on Earth. And we have ice, we have land, we have atmosphere, we have ocean. And I'm kind of like, really focused on oceanography and trying to understand how different processes in the ocean are impacting, our livelihood, but also the whole, climate system of the Earth.
Well, I think maybe the bigger question is, how often does NASA look back at Earth as opposed to at space? I mean, I think that most of us think of NASA as, going to the moon, going to Mars, going into deep space or something. But how much of NASA's work is focused on the Earth?
So that's a really good point, because when people ask me what I do, I said I'm an oceanographer and I work at NASA. They're like, big question mark on top of their head, because not that many people know that really a big portion of NASA's mission is looking back at the Earth. Having that vantage point of space and turning these instruments back towards our home allows us to observe the Earth in a way that we can't do it from sitting down here. So big portion of NASA, I think we have 20 different satellites are looking back at the Earth, at different aspects of Earth.
So talk about this current mission, the PACE mission. What differentiates that from the other NASA missions that are also looking at the Earth?
So PACE mission, it's my baby, so I love it, and I think it's the best one ever. But PACE is real. I mean, you love your children the best. They're better than everybody else, however weird they are. But PACE stands for Plankton, Aerosol, Cloud, Ocean Ecosystem, and it's a really one-of-a-kind mission that's going to be looking at the global ocean color and atmosphere as well. What makes it so special is that for difference that other global missions, it's going to be able to see so many different colors of the rainbow. So imagine, you have a supersonic camera sitting on a satellite looking down at the ocean. And before this one, we just had that, Nokia flip phone cameras. So the amount of information that we're going to be getting is so much larger than we had before, and higher quality information. Sir.
So what does that information tell you? So why does the color of the ocean tell us anything about the health of the ocean?
Yeah, great question. So again, everybody thinks the ocean is blue. Ocean is not blue. Ocean comes in many different colors, and what changes the color of the ocean? I don't know where you're from originally.
California.
California? Okay. Well, you have kind of bluish color of the ocean, but if you go in the San Francisco Bay and stuff, that ocean is not really anymore blue. It's kind of greenish and brownish and stuff. And the color of the ocean changes based on the things that are in the ocean. And we go in field, we measure the color of the ocean, we measure the things that are in the ocean, we try to build these mathematical ways to translate the color into what is in the ocean. And, we can have sediment, we can have dirt, we can have dissolved organic material, which is kind of leaf tea, but ultimately and most importantly, we can have this teeny tiny plankton that lives in there. These are either plants or animals that support the life in the ocean. So that's kind of what I study. So just by looking at the color, I can tell you how many of them there is in there. So yeah, and that tells a lot about, how healthy is the ocean.
That is kind of amazing when you think about it, that a satellite in space with a very fancy camera can look at the ocean and tell how many living things are inside the ocean. I mean, normally you would think that to determine the number of plankton or phytoplankton in the ocean, you'd have to sample the water itself and sort of count the living things. I mean, isn't it is this new technology, or is this this seems kind of mind blowing to me that you can count the number of living things in the ocean from space.
It is, because you have something that is so teeny tiny that you can't see with your eyes. And we usually take samples of water and look at them under the microscope. But if you think they're plants, no? and every plant kind of has green stuff, the same as plants on the land. These guys have this pigment that allows them to actually make that and to capture the energy and capture the carbon and feed the rest of the ocean.
Using chlorophyll?
So we can see this, chlorophyll, exactly. Yay! Awesome. So we can see this chlorophyll from space. The same way as we can see the plants on the land, we can see this chlorophyll in space. The more green there is, the more phytoplankton there is in the ocean. So this technology is really not that new. We've been observing ocean for over 20 years now, just by looking at a certain set of colors. So we can see the green, we can see a couple of blues, we can see a couple of reds, and from there we can say, ooh, there's this much phytoplankton in the ocean. But what PACE is bringing along is that it's going to be able to see so many different colors. So roll back into your backyard where you have different plants, different roses, or whatever. You have lots of different plants that have different colors, no?
I live in the desert, so there are several species of plant, but there aren't that many species of plant.
Just imagine that, like, Anza Borrego after the rain, that beautiful bloom of everything. And in the ocean, you have very similar situations where you have bunch of different phytoplankton that has different colors, and these pigments do not just pretty things, but they really help for that transfer of energy. So PACE is going to be able to see all these different colors. So currently we see green. If we want to talk about, like how much food is there in the ocean, we can say that now, but we cannot say what type of food is in the ocean, what type of phytoplankton is there, and how is it impacting, the carbon flow in the ocean, and so many different important questions that we have.
Yeah, so how does the amount and type of phytoplankton in the ocean determine ocean health? Or, like, what does that really tell us? Like, knowing that there are a bunch of tiny little creatures in the sea, what does that mean?
So, like on one side, phytoplankton is the base of marine food web. No. We want to have a good amount of phytoplankton to support the livelihood of all these other things, this really cool megafauna that we care about, dolphins and whales and manatees down in Florida. So we want to have this phytoplankton present there. And we want to have diversity of phytoplankton. We also want to have phytoplankton present there because it gives a really big ecosystem service to the climate of the ocean. So phytoplankton captures that carbon, and while feeding the rest of the ocean, actually removes some of the carbon from the atmosphere and controls the climate. But ultimately, when you think about ocean health, sorry, go ahead.
Well, actually, that's just a question. When we talk about oceans absorbing carbon, because I've read statistics about climate change and stuff, that oceans have sort of absorbed most of what humans have dumped into the atmosphere over the last 100 years.
So 50%, yeah.
So is that through phytoplankton? Is that what you're describing? Like when we talk about oceans absorbing carbon, how much of that is through phytoplankton and through other things eating phytoplankton?
Yeah, so there's two different systems in the ocean. Majority of this anthropogenic carbon that we are talking about is actually absorbed through ocean itself, through the water of the ocean now. So you just have a physical process of diffusion.
And that's the ocean acidification.
Anthropogenic, yeah. What phytoplankton does, phytoplankton really likes like a natural carbon that comes from the natural sources, the carbon that is already there. But just by doing so, by removing this carbon from the surface of the ocean, it allows more carbon to enter inside. So it's not directly eating the anthropogenic carbon, it's not taking that one, but it's removing the other one so the anthropogenic carbon can come inside. But what is more importantly, so is really good in, removes that carbon, puts it in the sugars, either dies and then sinks deep into the ocean and removes that carbon from that contact with the atmosphere, therefore leaving that space open for more carbon to come in. Or it shows it laterally into the fishies and rest of the things in the ocean that ultimately poop. And then the poop sinks down, and once again you're removing that carbon. So it's a really interesting process where you have biology just kind of making space for the physics to pull down that anthropogenic carbon. Is that kind of like explaining it?
Yeah, no, totally.
Awesome.
I guess so that brings me back to the bigger questions about PACE. So what's the key differentiator? Like, what's new is just that the camera is much nicer, and so you get greater resolution on what exactly is in the ocean.
Yeah, and that sort of sounds like, you can go down, but then and get a better iPhone and whatever phone. But it's a big deal for us, for 20 years we've been staring at the ocean and seeing it 5 or 6 colors, and I couldn't tell you if it's an oak forest or is it a meadow, or is it a desert blooming now. with PACE, I'm going to be able to tell you that. And it's really important because think about yourself. You can't eat peas all the time. You have a specific diet and you want to know what is there to be offered. So
that's a good analogy, differentiating between the desert in bloom versus the meadow, because it's like fundamentally different ecosystems, completely different. But you're right that viewed from above, you just be like, it's a bunch of green. Like it all looks the same. Could be a lawn, could be a meadow, could be the desert. Like after a big rain,
could be your desert, not blooming.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And ocean does have, jungles and deserts and stuff. We just don't think about it. We really never thought about it until we had a vision of ocean from the space. That's pretty much the first time we're like, when you look at these animations that NASA has, you see this like blooms like pulsating, in North Atlantic along the coast and stuff like that. And that's the vantage point of space. This is where we start understanding so much better the not just the vastness, but the diversity of the ecosystems in the ocean. And, and this is just the beginning. We just see the base of the food chain, and then you can just imagine everything else that happens in 3 dimensions of the ocean, in a sense.
And so
it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So what are you most excited about with the PACE mission? Like, which aspect of the PACE mission gets you fired up?
So there's lots of human impact when it comes to PACE, like harmful algal blooms and all these things, fisheries in coastal area, aquaculture. I'm an open ocean girl. I'm a carbon girl. I'm really, really, really interested in understanding how the diversity of that phytoplankton, so the community that you see in your blooming desert, impacts the flow of carbon. I'm really working on that whole story that we spoke about is, where is the carbon going to end up? Because ultimately, the diversity of the phytoplankton community in the surface will determine the path of that carbon. And once I understand that, we can work with modelers, and modelers can put that in their bigger system models, and then give us a better opportunity to understand what's going to be happening down the line, not just with the oceans, but also with the whole Earth system, because everything is interconnected. So that's where I am.
Yeah, I think that's something, when you talk about just getting more data to put into models, that's something I sort of realized on our expedition to Greenland, where I was describing launching the little NASA probe with the OMG. It was just like a little metal cylinder that bobs up and down and measures temperature and salinity in the fjord and kind of helps determine how much the ocean is melting the glaciers, or vice versa, like how much water is coming from each. And, you're like, it's just one tiny little device that just adds data to, and it made me realize that how much of modern science is just tons and tons of data.
Yep.
Trying to paint a more full image of how the world actually works. And so when you talk about a mission like PACE, or you talk about OMG and like launching this little temperature and salinity probe, you're like, it's not as if one instrument is doing the thing. It's not like the one instrument is, making key discoveries by itself necessarily, but it's helping to determine, I don't know, it just made me realize that the vastness of science now. You're sort of like, it takes a lot of data to sort of understand very complex systems.
Yeah, and I'm a biologist by training. I started as a biologist, doing classical biological things, looking at the things under the microscope, looking at the little, foxes running to the forest and stuff. And as I was going up, through my training, I've been turning myself more and more towards data. I still go on ocean, I still collect samples, I still, throw these little probes similar to ones that you have, thrown to see a temperature and salinity, because again, temperature and salinity defines the ecosystem in which my phytoplankton lives. There's such a trove of data out there, and the more data we get, what that allows us to is to better focus on the things that we don't understand. So PACE is going to give us, currently, to step back, currently we know from the current ocean color satellites that there's a big change happening in the ocean. There's certain types of oceans, certain portions of the oceans that are getting greener, rapidly. And we can just say that they're getting greener because we can't see different colors. But with PACE, we're going to be able to look at those portions of the ocean and understand, is that just only a change in the number of the phytoplankton? Or is it also actually community changing? Because going back, if you have a specific thing that depends and likes to eat only peas, and peas are disappearing, we have a problem. Every new data set, every new vastness of data allows us to focus better on a problem. And there's the more data we have, the better decisions we can make.
And what you're describing there, like this species composition sort of thing. I mean, that's kind of like the algal blooms, like from like agricultural runoff and things, where it just kills an entire area because the wrong.
Yes. And that's one of the things that we're going to be able to see. So think about, like you have coastal California, went to grad school there. You have this red tide blooms, or you have this like diatom pseudonychia blooms that make birds and sea mammals kind of like a little bit cuckoo because it has this toxin that impacts their brain. So by looking at it from space, if we can see it early, we can send a warning to the local, like mammal society, decision makers, surfers, and everybody who like kind of like lives.
Yeah.
I mean, surfers. I mean, like they're out there. You don't want them to be more cuckoo than they are, no? But and you would be surprised how much of that coastal community is actually plugged into our data. Because we really work hard to have those type of communities that are dependent on the ocean, the coastal communities, have access to this data that we produce. We've been working for the last 3 years really closely with people like surfers, aquaculture people, fishermen, policymakers to actually start using PACE data the same second they come out. So you can make this informed decision about, there's a harmful algal bloom coming. We should maybe not, pick oysters for like 2 weeks so we don't kill anybody who's going to eat those oysters and things like that. So that's all interconnected, yeah.
I feel like the PACE mission needs to chat with more professional surfers. I'm like, why'd you get a rock climber? Like, I'm into like mountains and glaciers.
What?
Like,
We'll make a surfer out of you. Like you got, like I was like, at one point you're gonna start exploring other spheres of the earth, and like we're in motion. We welcome you. But everything is interconnected. Like ocean controls, in a sense, climate. It controls to big portion the cycle of the water. You can't climb as everything is wet. It gets slippery and you fall, and you don't want to fall.
No,
so
and
all
actually,
these things.
Like I was saying, I mean, my last 2 big expeditions that were both for National Geographic TV shows, this summer was to Alaska, the summer before was to Greenland, but both of them involved boats to navigate fjords. Both of them went through, basically the local communities all rely on fishing. And so it's, it just makes you remember how much of the world is dependent. And then also, I mean, just with Arctic glaciers retreating, that is sea level rise, and that's like hundreds of millions of people around the earth that are affected by oceans rising. And so, no matter, I live in a desert and I mostly climb rocks, and so I don't often think about the ocean necessarily. But, as soon as you go on an expedition, as soon as you really think about it, you're like the entire coast. I mean, that's, it's hundreds of millions of humans that are affected by what goes on with the oceans.
Yeah, and in a sense, like again, you live in the desert, you climb and so on, but think about just like economically, there's a big portion of the protein coming from the ocean. Remove that source of protein. Now you have an impact on the rest of the, protein sources on the land. So even if you don't eat fish, if you don't like fish, you don't care about the ocean, stuff like that, there's so many different routes that ocean will, that's going to impact you. Just think about ocean transport. There's so many different things. I mean, ultimately, for many of us, ocean is just not livelihood. Ocean is like, part of our cultural heritage. I come from the coastal community. My parents come from 2 islands. It's just part of everything, everything what I do starts and ends with the ocean. Your weather is associated with the ocean. The stories are associated with the ocean. So, ocean makes so much strong impact on all of us around the earth, regardless if we're like close to the ocean or living in a desert like you are.
And maybe the most underappreciated aspect, like you're saying, if it's absorbed 50% of anthropogenic carbon, and that's something that's sort of nobody thinks about. I mean, the ocean is taken for granted as a repository for waste and for absorbing waste in the atmosphere, and just kind of, it's like the big emptiness that helps clean that we never really think of and sort of take for granted.
Yeah, it's ocean. You don't see it, far away from your eyes, far away from the mind, but it's there. It's big, and it's controlling pretty much everything what we do.
So is there anything else you think I should know about the PACE mission? I mean,
it's pretty awesome.
We've really covered the P, the phytoplankton, but is there anything else we should know about it?
We should touch on A and C, yeah. So aerosols and clouds. I can say a little bit about that if you're interested. So, and this might be maybe more important for you. So like, by having this amazing technology, and that's just, I spoke just one of the instruments, which is this ocean color instrument that is hyperspectral. We're going to have 2 teeny tiny instruments on a side. They're looking at the polarization of the light. So like, if you think about the light and you put the sunglasses to stop the glare, that's pretty much cutting out certain polarization aspects of the light. It's kind of hard to explain, but by looking at the polarization of the light, we can get even more information about little things that live they don't live, the little things that are in the atmosphere, so aerosols and clouds. Understanding the interaction between those and different types of aerosol and clouds can really, really, really help us to understand the role of atmosphere and those guys and climate. We really kind of don't know too much about it, and PACE is really with the suite of instruments that it has, not just that main one, can really answer and give us answer to those really big questions about the role that aerosols and clouds have in climate. But ultimately, rolling back to human health, that kind of like most of the people think about, just like, I don't know, where were you during this Canadian fires? Probably back in the desert, and you didn't really care about them. But
no,
we were like choking.
This summer?
Yeah.
No, actually, so the expedition that I was on, it ended with a boat in Alaska because we were getting to this peak in Alaska. But we actually started by bicycling from Colorado. So we bicycled from Colorado up to the Canadian border and then got in a boat and sailed up into Southeast Alaska. So we actually biked like right through the center of a lot of those fires, but just by sheer good fortune happened to nail like this 5-day weather window, and we kind of like managed to thread the needle, and it all kind of worked out for us. And so we actually weren't too impacted by fires, but we were sort of threatened by them the entire time, and had a few days of heavy smoke, but generally we were like, oh, it was pretty crazy.
It was disgusting, and like biking through that, it's a no-no. I mean, like, we couldn't go out here for a couple of days in DC, and I can just not imagine how it was further up north. So those kind of things, I mean, like looking back at the climate change and things that will be happening in the future, however much we wish them not happening, they will be happening. These kind of events are going to be happening more and more, and PACE is going to be able to observe that information and give kind of like better source of data, better information about where those type of aerosols are going to go, how are they going to merge, how are they going to change, and ultimately how are they going to impact our livelihood and the livelihood of the rest of the ecosystem. We think about ourselves, but what about the little creatures that live in the forest? Like, we can hide inside, but so there's lots of information about both ocean and atmosphere that we're getting, and getting those two together is really cool because they talk to each other. They exchange things. Like, think about volcano drops certain things in the ocean, and that's food, and the phytoplankton bloom, and there's so many cool stories that are going to come out of it. So that's another thing that you should know about PACE.
Yeah, so actually I have maybe two more really basic questions about PACE. One, how long is it supposed to last? Like, how long is the mission?
That's a great question. There is an official length of a mission and unofficial length of a mission. Officially, I think we are in the books to last for 3 years, and one of the media people might correct me on that one. But unofficially, it has the fuel to last for a very long time. So, for example, the mission that is currently operating is called Modus Aqua. That's a really important mission that is, once again, looking at the color of the Earth. That one was launched in the same way, but it was launched 20 years ago. So we say 3 years. Ultimately, we hope we're going to be lasting really, really long time and keep on giving this information to all of us to do some cool science.
So you're saying that the NASA satellites are a lot like every other home appliance, where your warranty is for like 5 or 10 years, but you hope that it lasts for 30. You just hope that it keeps working as long as possible.
Yeah, pretty much. And we know that it's going to last a long time, but it's like, okay, this is not going to end up anywhere. Okay, 3 years is right. Thank you, Kate. This part is going to be cut out. It's just the level of bureaucracy that it takes from taking the mission from 3 years to 5 years would put such a financial drain on the system.
This won't cut out. I think that's an important thing, though, is that, I mean, because it's true in all aspects of human life, where it's like you can only guarantee a few years, but you can sort of hope for more, and you can assume that it's going to work. And wasn't that true for the Mars rover, whatever? Didn't it last like way longer than it's supposed to?
That's true for every mission that is put out there. We always put extra fuels. We always the amount of fuel, we just fuel the satellite, which is really exciting now. And if you think about it, majority of that fuel is actually going to be used to burn the satellite when it's coming back to the atmosphere, so it doesn't like land somewhere in the middle of the desert, no. But that small percentage of the fuel that's going to be used there to kind of like control its orbit can last for 10 years or more if we're like really smart, and there's probably smart people working in NASA, so they're going to spin it around and use it other different ways to control that orbit, not to spend all that fuel. And instruments, in theory, even if they start degrading, we have put so many different checks and system that we can, even with the degrading instruments, we can still do good science, because we calibrate against the sun, we calibrate against the moon, we calibrate against some spots in the ocean where we have these buoys that you talked about. So, it can last, if you take care of it, like your home appliance, it can last for a very, very long time.
Totally. And you have a bunch of the smartest people in the world taking care of it. So you're like, oh, it's probably going to last pretty well. And actually, so that maybe brings me to my most basic question, which I probably should have started with. But the PACE mission, so we're just referring to a satellite that orbits the Earth?
Yes.
Like the PACE mission is one object?
Cute satellite.
And how big is the satellite? Like, what is it?
So imagine 2 suburban mom minivans plumped together. That's your size. So they it looks like a cube. And then on top, or actually kind of on the side, if I set up here, you have the big instrument called Ocean Color Instrument. And that one is pretty large. it's kind of like this and this. And that's kind of sits on top of that box. And then the two other satellites, two other instruments, the polarization ones, the polarimeter ones, those are the CubeSats. So you know what a CubeSat is? Those are the teeny tiny satellites that launch in space independently. Everybody can launch them. Okay. So we took those and we attached them to the satellite. So these are made not by NASA. These are made by the collaborators either in Netherlands or here at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And so we just attached them there and connected to the to the computer of the satellite. And
what are those satellites for?
So those are the instruments. So those are predominantly going to be looking, so instruments on the satellite. They're teeny tiny satellites, but we kind of attach them to the big satellite. They're going to be looking mostly at atmosphere, but we're hoping we're going to be able to kind of check out the ocean a little bit with them as well.
Oh. So it's sort of modular. You have the main NASA instrument, and then you add other sort of add-on features. It's like adding lenses onto a camera or something, or adding extra.
In a sense, think about going back to the buoy that you deployed in Greenland. The buoy can have a bunch of different instruments. So the one that you'd probably deployed had, I think, temperature, salinity, oxygen probably, and maybe something else. So you can attach instruments. And once you're building the satellite, which is pretty much, your home for all these instruments, if other agencies have an instrument they want to contribute, very often NASA works with other, agencies or institutions.
Yeah,
because it's really expensive, to launch a thing. So you just kind of attach things.
That's actually maybe the biggest lesson that I learned from the expedition to Greenland was how much, because we were in the most remote part of eastern Greenland, in the middle of nowhere, and it's really hard to get there. It's really expensive to get there. And so we had a scientist with us, Heidi Silvestre, who's a French scientific glaciologist, and she was basically executing sort of experiments for universities all over the world because it's just so hard for people to get there. And so it made me realize that a lot of science is sort of that opportunity. It's if somebody's going to a place, then send them a PDF of the experiment that you want them to do, and they'll bring you back some data. So it's funny to hear that even at the highest levels of science, like NASA sending satellites to space, there's still some other university. It's hey, let us just tack on an extra little piece onto your satellite so that we can get some data too.
Yeah, and again, it's not as opportunistic as, there's lots of reviews and things.
Of course.
But it pretty much, that's how science works. It's, however important it is, there is only a certain amount of money that's going to come our way. Going on field, going in space is extremely expensive. So, I've been to Greenland I'm sorry?
I said understandably so. I mean, if it sounds like basically the hardest thing you can imagine doing is sending something into orbit and then keeping it in orbit and all the instruments involved. It totally makes sense that if you're going to all that work, somebody else should be reaping some benefit from it as well to learn more in a different way.
And exactly the same way as on a field, it's every time you go in a field, you're collecting your stuff and then you're collecting water and samples for so many, many, many more people. Because it's just, it's once you're going there, bring everybody along and make sure that everybody really benefits of this once in a lifetime opportunity. In ocean, we don't get that many satellites, especially ocean biology. The last one we got was 20 years ago. So it's a good opportunity to jump on the board.
Totally. But cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and I appreciate chatting. And good luck with the mission. Hope you guys learn a lot.
Thank you.